For the longest time, the human mind was this total black box. But a recent revolution in cognitive science has totally ripped up the old rulebook and given us a new one for how we learn. So, in this explainer, we're going to tear that science apart and give you a playbook you can actually use.
Okay, tell me if this sounds familiar. You spend hours, maybe even days, cramming for a test or a big presentation. You feel like you've got it down pat. And then, poof. A week later, it's just gone. It's so frustrating, right?
Well, here's the good news. It's not you. Your brain is not the problem here. The problem is the playbook we've all been handed. And it's time we all learned a much, much smarter way to play the game.
All right, first things first, we have to talk about the biggest myth out there, what I like to call the cramming delusion. It's that last-minute, caffeine-fueled panic, that belief that if we just push hard enough, we can force knowledge into our brains. Come on, we've all done it.
And this right here, this is the core difference. On one side, you've got that stressful, effortful cramming. Sure, it feels productive in the moment, but almost nothing actually sticks. And on the other side, you have smart learning. And look, it's not about being lazy or putting in less effort. It's about being strategic with your effort so that you get massive retention.
So to really get this new, smarter way of learning, we kind of have to go back in time and see where the old way even came from. Because honestly, the science of learning has gone through this huge, huge revolution.
So for like the first half of the 1900s, the big idea was something called behaviorism. It basically treated our minds like a black box. All that mattered was the stimulus you put in and the observable response you got out. But then, starting around the 1950s, cognitive science came along and said, whoa, wait a minute. Learning isn't passive at all. It's a super active process where we construct meaning.
So these behaviorists, they truly believe you could explain everything, even complex stuff like problem solving, without ever needing words like thinking or understanding. And a really famous experiment with a cat in a box seemed to prove their whole point.
So you have the psychologist, Edward Thorndike, and he puts a hungry cat inside this puzzle box. The cat just thrashes around doing all sorts of random things until, totally by accident, it pulls a string that opens the door so it can get to some food. But here's the kicker. When he put the cat back in, it didn't go straight for the string. It took a bunch of tries. So Thorndike's big takeaway was, hey, the cat's not thinking its way out, it's just strengthening a connection through rewards.
Okay, but here's the thing. The new science of learning, it shows us we are not just cats in a box. It proves that real, deep, lasting learning, the kind that finally stops that awful forgetting cycle, it all comes down to 3 powerful keys.
Yeah, this whole scientific revolution, we can boil it all down to just 3 simple, actionable ideas you can start using today.
Okay, key number 1. You have to start with what's already in your head. I mean, none of us are blank slates, right? We walk into every new situation with beliefs and mental models that are already there. And if you just ignore them, the new stuff will never stick.
There's this amazing children's story called Fish is Fish that just nails this idea. A frog tells his fish friend all about the amazing things on land, but the fish can only understand people, birds, and cows by imagining them as, well, weird fish. We all do this. It's like, if you believe the Earth is flat and someone tells you it's round, you might just picture a giant round pancake in space. You have to deal with that first model before the new one can stick.
All right, so key number 2 flows right from that last one. Just memorizing a bunch of random facts is like having a big pile of bricks. It's not very useful. See, experts don't just know more stuff than beginners. The real difference is how they organize that stuff into a rich, interconnected web, like building a house with those bricks.
Okay, let's look at a concrete example. A novice might memorize a few random facts. Arteries are thicker than veins, they're more elastic. Okay, great. But an expert understands why. They know the elasticity is there to handle the pressure from the heart. That framework, that understanding, lets them solve new problems, like how to design an artificial artery. Their knowledge is actually usable. And that brings us to the final key, the one that really ties it all together: metacognition. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's basically just thinking about your own thinking. It's that little voice in your head that asks, wait, do I really get this, or am I still just picturing a pancake Earth?
You can actually see this in different teaching styles. Teacher A, they just want you to get the work done. Teacher B goes a step further and wants to make sure you're actually learning. But the best teacher, Teacher C, their whole goal is to hand the keys over to you, to get you to fire up that metacognition and take charge of your own learning.
Okay, so we've got our 3 keys, right? Engage your preconceptions, build a framework, and use metacognition. But how do you actually do that? Let's get practical and talk about your expert toolkit. I've got 2 incredibly powerful techniques for you. First up in our toolkit is the Feynman technique. It's named after this brilliant Nobel Prize-winning physicist, Richard Feynman. And his whole philosophy was that if you can't explain something simply, you probably don't understand it very well yourself.
It's actually super simple. Here's what you do. First, pick a concept you want to learn. Second, try to teach it to someone else, or even just a rubber duck on your desk. Use the simplest terms you can. Third, and this is crucial, pay attention to where you get stuck, or start using confusing jargon. Those are your knowledge gaps. Then, fourth, you go back to the books, fill in those gaps, and then simplify your explanation again. You see what's happening? This whole process forces you to build that solid conceptual framework we were talking about earlier.
All right, our second tool is a real game changer. It's called active recall. This is like the mortal enemy of just passively highlighting your textbook or rereading your notes a dozen times. It is the absolute key to stopping that cycle of learn and forget that we started with.
And you can start doing this like right now. When you're using flashcards, don't just peek at the answer and go, "Oh yeah, I knew that." No, you actually have to force your brain to pull that answer out of thin air before you flip the card. Or close your book and try to explain the main ideas of a chapter out loud. Or try to draw a key diagram completely from memory. That struggle, that's where the real learning happens.
So look, when you start putting these pieces together, the 3 core keys, plus these powerful tools like the Feynman technique and active recall, learning totally changes. It stops being this awful chore and becomes a skill you can get better at for the rest of your life.
And this quote from Nobel laureate Herbert Simon just nails it. The meaning of knowing has totally shifted. The whole point now isn't just to be a walking encyclopedia. It's to have the tools in your head to find information, figure it out, and actually use it to solve problems. So here's the bottom line. Learning isn't some passive thing that just happens to you. It's an active process that you are totally in control of. By ditching that old, passive cramming model for a strategic, active approach, you really can learn anything more effectively. So the only question left for you is, what are you going to learn differently tomorrow?